Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. I don't know if we've ever started the show off with a guest, but we're going to today because this is something I've alluded to for a long time, that November 3rd, just so we can all emotionally and perhaps physically prepare, November 3rd is going to be a terrible day. And not only that day, but the months following it. Michael Anton is the author of The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. He also wrote an article recently called The Coming Coup, which you have to read on theamericanmind.org. He's a lecturer at the Hillsdale College in D.C. Mr. Anton, how are you, sir?
Fine, thanks.
Glad you're here. So let me ask this. What do you think the chances are that November 3rd goes well, that we have the results and half the country is very happy and half the country is upset, but accepts the results and we have a peaceful transition of power as normal? What are the chances?
Low. Low. I mean, the Democrats and the left and the media are laying the groundwork for this now, that no matter what happens, they've already said, at first it was, it could take a while. And then the second leg of the PSYOP was, it's going to look like Donald Trump won on November 3rd, but don't be fooled. He really lost. Just give us 30 days or so to truck in some ballots and we'll prove that. I mean, I'm exaggerating or interpreting their words, but, they're taking for granted that, well, once all the ballots are counted, Biden will win. But yes, it will look like a blowout on November 3rd. But, all the mail-ins and these late gathering ballots and stuff will prove that Biden won. It'll be like what typically happens in California now. No election, it seems, that in California is ever resolved on the day of. It takes the state in where Silicon Valley is, usually 3 weeks to a month to 6 weeks, to sort out, state legislative elections and congressional seats and things like this. Because of all of the arcane counting rules. But really, this is my perspective. I'm sure I'll be criticized for it. Has there ever been, aside from Florida in 2000, when an election wasn't resolved on the day of the election, has a Republican ever won? Right? That never happens. The whole purpose of this is to drag it out so that the Democratic operatives who run the election machinery and have more lawyers and have friends in the courts and all that can sue and create confusion and keep so-called counting and finding new ballots until they get the desired result.
What does that chaos look like? So let's start here. It's definitely going to be dragged out. There's no doubt about that, right? I mean, they're going to push this out. Yeah. So what does the country look like for, let's just even say, the next 30 days after the election with no winner?
Well, there are certain things that we can't predict because the mail-in ballot situation. Look, it's before it's been done on absentees and early voting, where the ballots accumulate in crates and things like this. But some new things that have happened in a handful of electoral jurisdictions in the past that are now being pushed nationwide, such as mail-in voting, where you don't have to request an absentee ballot. You just get something sent into the mail and you send it back. These extensions, all of this stuff hasn't happened. So it's going to be hard to predict because we're going to be in an unprecedented situation. It seems to me fairly easy to predict a few other things, though, because Democrats and Biden allies and leftists and ruling class hacks and so on have already told us that this will happen, which is to say, they use language such as street fight and we're going to fill the streets, civil unrest, civil disobedience. So I absolutely expect that the left will turn out its massive crowds in the cities and essentially try to shut the country down. Beginning on November 3rd, whatever the numbers are, they're going to say, Biden won. Biden won. And, we can't, the country cannot transact any ordinary business until Trump is gone and put the pressure on. They've already said this is what they're going to do in a number of leaks and in comments from very high-ranking people, such as Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and Al Gore and Joe Biden.
Yeah, so Hillary Clinton said to Joe Biden, do not concede under any circumstance.
Yeah.
That's a wild sentence, right? Like even if you lose, or whatever, right? Do not concede under any circumstance. Until when? What was the rest of her thought there? Until what?
Her
when
thought
should you
was
concede?
that he can't lose and he won't lose, that the election is preordained. So he shouldn't concede and he should leave it to, if you were to give her the benefit of the doubt, which I find it hard to do for Hillary Clinton, but if you were to give her the benefit of the doubt, maybe she has some kind of metaphysical certainty that vastly more Americans will genuinely vote without fraud or any kind of electoral irregularity for Joe Biden, and it'll just take longer to count than it normally would. Therefore, if the process is allowed to play out, he will win the election. If you aren't going to give her the benefit of the doubt, and you look at what the way like Orange County, California went in 2018, I think back to the Norm Coleman, Al Franken race in Minnesota. I forgot what year that was. I think that was 2008, where an election comes in really tightly, and then they go into the counting mode and drag it out for 30 days. The Republican always loses in that circumstance, always, every time. So if you're not giving her the benefit of the doubt, I would say she's saying, don't worry about it, Joe. Don't concede, because our army of hacks, lawyers, poll watchers, and state-level election certification officials will take care of this for you.
All right, let's back it up a second. I got a ton of questions about all of that, which we'll get to. Can you tell us about the Election Integrity Project? What is this thing, and why did they leak it? Why do we even know about it?
Well, what it appears to be is, again, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, which in this case you absolutely shouldn't, it's a kind of Orwellian name that is cover for, Election Integrity Project is doing the exact opposite of what its name suggests it's doing. It's trying to set up in advance a mechanism for undermining the legitimacy of the election and ensuring that Joe Biden becomes president, no matter what votes are cast and where, right? So the name is a lie, from what I can tell. They leaked a war game in which they gamed out a Joe Biden loss. And and their answer was, well, what should we do if our candidate actually loses to ensure that he becomes president? And don't concede, get on the phone with Democratic governors and strong arm them into sending Democratic electors, even if their states went for Trump. So, that you could call that a coup, and then, and sit back and wait and see what the military does. Now, if we want to get really precise, a coup, if we know the Edward Litwack definition in his classic book from the 70s, coup d'etat, right, is when the military steps in. The Democrats have been openly calling on the military to step in, and some officers have indicated that, senior officers might, but the chairman of the Joint Chiefs very pointedly said the military will play, quote, no role in the upcoming election. So he's trying to distance himself from this. More precisely, I think what we're trying to do is a color revolution, which is something the U.S. government started to perfect. I first noticed it in the 2000s when, if you remember all of that business, this was a long time ago in Ukraine, around 2003, 2004, the Ukrainian prime minister, I think that's right, who was poisoned, and he had, had his face disfigured, if you remember all of this. What the United States does is they delegitimize a leader that they consider to be authoritarian and antithetical to U.S. interests. They gin up street protests, massive media coverage against him, all kinds of Western pressure and sanctions, until even if the person, whoever it is, won an election, governing becomes untenable, and for their own just peace of mind and for the good of the country, they just step down and somebody else gets put in there. And it's called the color revolution, because it becomes the first time in Ukraine was the orange revolution. So all the people supporting the ouster were orange. In Iran, it was green, and I forgot where it's also been purple. So the color is different depending on the country, but that's what it's called. And that's what they're doing now. I think, at least that's what it looks like.
Yeah. Okay. I got a ton of questions. Let's do the delegate thing you just mentioned. So this is a wild potential, but maybe the least wild of all the things that they laid out in the Election Integrity Project. So you're saying the people go and vote, and essentially they're voting for the delegates of their state. So let's say Ohio, Trump wins Ohio. So people go and they vote for the delegates to vote for Trump in the Electoral College. And you're saying the Democrat...
Yeah.
The electors.
So,
right?
and in all states except Maine and Nebraska, I'm pretty sure this is correct, there's a popular vote at the presidential level. The winner of the popular vote for that state, then it's winner take all for that state's electoral votes. So if you win the popular vote in a state by literally one vote, all of that state's electoral votes go for the person who won that vote. The exceptions being Maine and Nebraska, which divide up their electoral votes. So the idea would be, let's say Trump, narrowly wins, like he narrowly. I mean, by tens of thousands of votes, but that's still fairly narrow when you count all the votes cast. Sure. He narrowly wins, say, Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota or something, and they get on the horn and say, okay, governor, Democratic governor, don't send Republican electors to the Electoral College. You need to send Democratic electors. That was in the report. That was in the leaked report. So, I'm not saying they'll actually be able to pull that off, but that was a scenario that they gamed out. And then you have to ask, why would you leak that deliberately? That was a secret. It's not like they had a mole in the Transition Integrity Project taping them. They put that into the press themselves on purpose. Why did they do that? I think it was to get people ready. We may be making this attempt, and if we do make this attempt, we want you, Joe Public, to think it was Donald Trump's fault, that he lost somehow is illegitimate and isn't leaving when he should leave, and so any means on our side are fair game to get him gone.
This delegate thing, the fact that the governor of Wisconsin, let's say, who's a Democrat, could say, all right, never mind people of Wisconsin, I'm going to send Democratic delegates and vote for the Democratic candidate.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Electors, but because remember, the president isn't elected on election day, technically. According to the Constitution, he's elected when the Electoral College meets and casts its vote formally. And there's a day in January when that happens, and it gets the barest news coverage because it's a formality. It's considered a formality. Yeah. In this case, it wouldn't be a formality. Now, if a governor tried to do that, you can guarantee the president's lawyers would sue. It would immediately, just like in Florida, the Supreme Court wouldn't have time to spend a couple of years kicking it around the lower courts, and it would have to be done very, very quickly. But
that's the chaos they want anyway, right? That's the chaos the Democrats want. So they're fine with that, no?
Well, they're fine. I mean, they're fine with it, I guess, unless they win, unless they lose. Hard to say. I mean, everybody remembers Bush v. Gore in 2000. I used to know the details of this reasonably well, and I don't remember it that clearly. They think it was a 5-4 decision. It was actually a 2-part decision, and the part of the decision that actually resolved the Florida recount was 7-2, and there was another aspect of the decision that was 5-4. So you might get a super, not a bare majority, but a supermajority of the court to go one way or the other. It's hard to know. I mean, John Roberts has been drifting way left lately. Gorsuch surprised us with that civil rights decision on transgender issues during the summer. So very, very, very hard to predict which way the Supreme Court would go in a case like that.
Okay, let me give you my scenario on this point. Chaos. They just breed chaos. They want more chaos. The more chaos, the better. Then the Democrats come in and say, all right, Trump, we'll let you win. We'll let you win. Even though they legitimately lost or whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll let you win. We'll let you have the White House, but you have to make D.C. and Puerto Rico a state, which would give them 4 new Democratic senators. And you have to, what was the other thing in the Election Integrity Project? It was the state, get rid of the Electoral College for good moving forward. And then we'll back off. Do you see that being a possibility?
I could see them making the threat. I couldn't possibly see the president accepting the threat. Remember, too, that part of the core of the threat was I think it was California, Oregon, and Wisconsin secede from the union, right? We'll go if you don't give us this, Mr. President. I mean, if I may be somewhat bold, if the president's watching this, my advice, Mr. President, if they say that, call their bluff. I'm a native Californian. I'd be willing to need a passport to go home and see my mom and dad, to get rid of California progressivism, to kick it out of the union. With those 3 states gone, the Republicans have an electoral lock for a generation and maybe 2 generations.
That's right. That's a good point.
And they don't have the pipeline of woke insanity coming out of Berkeley and Santa Monica and Portland and Seattle. If you guys think on the West Coast think you're going to be happier without us, we probably, I'll speak only for myself. I think you might be too. We might all.
As I live in San Diego, I would be one of those same people saying, "Good, finally, we've been calling for that for a long time." Mr. Yanti, can you stick around for one more quick segment? We'll take a quick break.
Yeah.
The book is The Stakes: America at the Point of No Return. Go buy the book, The Stakes: America at the Point of No Return, and then the article at theamericanmind.org is The Coming Coup. Definitely go read that. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I wanted to get a little more time with Michael Anton. He was generous enough to give it. The book is The Stakes: America at the Point of No Return, and chapter 1 is about California, so maybe we can talk a bit about that. And then the article is The Coming Coup in the American Mind, americanmind.org. And he's a lecturer at Hillsdale in D.C. Sir, what I was so fascinated by this Election Integrity Project, was John Podesta the head of it, or was he just the guy who pretended to be Biden?
He definitely was the guy who played Biden. I'm not clear if he was the head.
Who the head was?
They said there were 100 people participating in the story.
Amazing. What's so fascinating about it all, the read of it, is how they blame Trump for everything, right? Like Trump is always the bad guy. It was Trump who's the one who was going to send out his goon squads in the streets. It was Trump who was going to use the lawyers. It was Trump who was going to do all these terrible, horrible things. Did you get that take as well? And that seems very gaslighting.
That was the purpose of the leak. Yeah, it was to say the sub text was the Democrats are going to do this, but for it to seem legitimate and for us to pull it off, we have to make the public think that it's Trump's fault that he's doing it. It's a pure case of projection, except this case, it's, usually projection goes on psychologically sub rosa and you don't even know you're doing it. They know they're doing it. They have to blame Trump for what they want to do because otherwise the public won't accept it.
What do we make about the military part of it? Because as you mentioned before, Al Gore talked about the military taking him out, literally dragging him out. Joe Biden did an interview with the Daily Show host talking about how the military is going to drag him out.
Joe Biden said more than once. Yeah.
That's pretty wild, right? So
I was encouraged by General Milley saying we will play, trying to scotch this and saying we will play no role. It's hard to know. I mean, if the president yesterday or 2 days ago addressed this question and said, that some of the generals and the people in the Pentagon don't like me because I'm against forever war and I don't give them everything they want, but I'm sure that the soldiers are with me. My personal view is I really hope, what a disaster if it came to that, if the military were given some, urged by Democrats to do X and it divided the ranks and you had some people who wanted to and some people who didn't and they end up fighting amongst themselves. What I have put the word out quietly to friends of mine in the military and ex-military officers whom I know, quietly, I haven't done this in public and I'm not going to name any names, but I've said, look, to the extent that you talk to people still in the ranks that have any kind of influence and authority, tell them to cut this out. They're going to, if you love the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Air Force, et cetera, you guys need to cool it and make sure that any of your friends or formers out there pouring fire on this, stop it, because this is harming the country and it's harming those institutions that you love. So the best thing anybody who loves the military and who has influence with the military and who loves the United States can do is to urge calm and to urge that the military retain its apolitical stance and play no role in this whatsoever, including no role in any public discussion of it whatsoever. That's the best advice I can give them, and I think that's the best advice they can give their friends in uniform.
What is defenseone.com? You linked to this open letter by a retired Army officer and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel.
Yeah.
Who both wrote this open letter saying you're going to have to,
these
Chief
guys
of Staff, you're going to have to jump on.
They retired, I think, at Lieutenant Colonel. So, they rose through the ranks, but they didn't get to be super senior. But they're fairly prominent defense intellectuals since they've retired. They're the types that in a Democratic administration would be expecting to be assistants and secretaries, undersecretaries, and so on, with perhaps a path up to even higher office. And to see the people of that stature who are very well known and well connected in Washington write a letter like that to General Milley, putting him on the spot, saying, General Milley, you're going to have to give an order to an active duty unit to storm the White House, was the most coup-like thing I've ever read in my life, in the United States anyway. That's the kind of thing that I find extraordinarily reckless, that's damaging to the military. And I know that letter angered a lot of people in the military, and I hope that anger will help lower temperatures.
Is defenseone.com, not to go too into that, but is that a hack group? Is that a think tank? What is defenseone.com?
No, it's a fairly well-respected, center-left defense intellectual website. I mean, it's anti-Trump, that's for sure, but it's mainstream in the sense that it's pretty closely allied with the left-wing think tanks, liberal think tanks, and with Democratic Party former officials and potentially future officials when there's another Democratic administration.
Yeah, pretty wild. Okay, let's talk about voter fraud. So the left, just like we were talking about in this article, our Election Integrity Project, talked about how it was Trump who is setting the stage for voter fraud. So, and you've mentioned it, ballots coming in, whatever. Because the left says, oh, there's no such thing as mail-in voter fraud, and Trump's just trying to undermine the legitimacy and the whole thing. How should we think about voter fraud in this election?
Well, ballot harvesting is one of the problems where people go around canvassing with ballots and deliver the ballots to the ballot counters. And, there's no way to know that those things were properly filled out by the person who allegedly is casting the vote. So that's a giant problem. And we're going to have the same integrity problem. if you've been following it, the experiments with mail-in voting that have taken place so far have been disastrous, where huge percentages of ballots get disqualified for various reasons. And, everybody wants to fight over the disqualification. Should we have disqualified more? Should we have disqualified less? We're going into mass uncharted territory with this election. I don't think it's possible even to predict what it's going to look like beyond saying it's going to be chaos and it's going to take a long time and everybody's going to fight. And like I said, anytime you go into a disputed situation like this over ballots, Republicans are at a disadvantage, and 99% of the time, if not more, they lose. The only prominent time I can think of when Republicans won a dispute like this was Florida, 2000. That it ended with a 550 vote lead for Bush, and in the end, the Supreme Court had to stop the counting. Otherwise, we would have been counting past Inauguration Day.
Which is their goal. Is there such thing as voter fraud?
I believe there is. The left denies it, but the left denies that there's such a thing as media ballot. I mean, look, people get caught doing voter fraud all the time, and when they get caught, then the left switches to, well, that's just an isolated incident. It doesn't prove anything, right? Here's an example that I use in the book. In 2012, there were a number of precincts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where not just one, but like 5 or more, I can't remember, Mitt Romney got literally 0 votes. Now, that's statistically impossible. That means not a single old lady went in there without her reading glasses and just punched the wrong ballot by accident across a range of precincts. It's statistically impossible. It's not proof in that nobody saw the fraud, right? But it's proof in the sense that there's no way that could have happened without fraud.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying Philadelphia is the Republican stronghold, but none? Not even one mistake? Yeah.
So I see the social media companies when right after the election, I see the social media companies shutting down Trump's account and probably other accounts as well.
I expect they will say he lost, and now he's using our platform to undermine our democracy, and they will turn him off. Yes, I expect that too.
Other people too?
Well, probably, but I mean, he's the big dog. So once you've turned him off, now they'll be taking a risk with that. Look, this is going to be a problem. There's a few possible outcomes. One is Trump really lost, but the Democrats are trying to steal it. Another is Trump really won, but the Democrats are trying to steal it. Another is Trump really lost, but his supporters don't believe the loss. Another is nobody really knows. Trump doesn't know. Biden doesn't know. Biden's people don't know. Trump's people don't know. But one or both sides claim they know, and they swear that they won, and the other side is illegitimate. The problem with all 3 of those scenarios is either way, neither side's supporters are going to accept the outcome, right? One side or the other is not going to accept the outcome. So if we have an election, say what you will about 2016, and it was awful, and the last 3 years or 4 years of resistance has been awful, but the American people did wake up on November 9th knowing who the president was going to be, even if half of them were extremely angry about it. But they, in one sense, they accepted the results. On another sense, the Democratic Party and the ruling class didn't accept the results because they ginned up the Russia hoax and impeachment and the resistance and all of this stuff. But if we potentially have something worse in 2020, where a bunch of people, half the country, either way, is going to say throughout, this is illegitimate. So in doing this, the Democrats, and they're going to blame Trump. I don't think this is in any way Trump's fault. But in doing this, the country's going to be torn apart in a way that it may be hard to put back together again.
Last question. How do we prepare for that? We're 50-something days out. What do I do? If someone watching this right now, what do we do?
I mean, for a Republican, for a Trump supporter, for anybody on the right, we're at a massive disadvantage. We can't fill the streets the way they can. We don't control the vote counting the way they can. They have all these levers of power. All we can do is shine a lantern on it and tell people what's going on and say, don't be fooled. When this happens, it's not going to be Donald Trump's fault. We may not be able to stop it, but it won't be Donald Trump's fault. And I think the other thing, too, is do any of us who have influence on the military or any of us who have a public platform keep that message out there and say to the military, you need to remain apolitical. You're going to be pressured by people in power, including by someone who you believe is going to be your next commander-in-chief. But you have to, at all times, act constitutionally and according to the oath you took as an officer or as a soldier, and don't let yourself get pressured into doing something that you know is wrong and that harms the country.
Whoa, Nelly. The stakes, America at the point of no return and the coming coup on AmericanMind.org is the article. Michael Anton, let's chat again. Things are going to, this is the beginning.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Professor. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So that was a lot, but I think on the right track, unfortunately. Let's do one more sort of politically segment, and then we'll change gears here a little bit with this author of this really fascinating book. We'll do that next. First, Beto O'Rourke was out there the other day saying that Biden can win Texas. Biden's going to win Texas this year. Here's the deal, though. If Texas ever does turn blue, which it very well could, California used to be a red state. I like to remind people of that every once in a while. California was a solidly red state, and now it's obviously the opposite. So it could happen with Texas. If that happens, Republicans will never win the presidency again. So that's what's at stake here. California has 55 electoral college votes, and Texas is second with 38. And then it jumps down to Florida, 29, and then Illinois and Pennsylvania have 20, and it goes down from there, right? So 38 electoral college votes. If Texas goes blue, that's a 36 electoral vote swing. So to make up 38 votes, guys, can we throw up the map here? This is the 2016 map. All right, so blue, obviously, the states Hillary won. So if Texas was blue in the last election, Trump would have to win everything he did, right? With Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, like Florida, all that. And New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia, that's 37. So you'd have to throw in there like one of the little states, like New Hampshire or something like that, right? On top of winning a sweep of everything else. And he only won Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan by 77,000 votes total combined. So he just stuck by in those three states. So Texas flipping blue would be crushing, right? So my point of that is like, if Texas flipped blue and he didn't just squeak by in Wisconsin, I don't even know what you do then. I don't even know if it's possible at that point. So this would be absolutely crushing if Texas turns blue. That being said, it's not happening this year. So you don't have to stress about it. Every 2 years, the media makes this big pipe dream, or it's a pipe dream for them, makes this thing seem like a reality. And it's inevitable. But maybe it is inevitable, but not 2020. That's not going to do it. So the reason they get excited is Mitt Romney won Texas by 16 points back in 2012, and Trump only won by 9. So it's trending in that direction, right? But I think the reason Trump only won by 9 is because in Texas, there were a lot of disgruntled Cruz Republicans who were not going to vote for Trump. You remember Cruz's, they were the top two, right? They were battling back and forth. And do you remember Cruz's convention speech? I've never been in a group of people that have turned on someone so quickly, ever. It was unbelievable when he said, hey, we just got to vote your conscience. That crowd, holy cow. So loyal Texas Republicans did not vote for Trump when they would have because they supported Cruz, right? Makes sense? So I guess my point is I have a hard time believing that there's any Cruz Republicans in Texas who wouldn't vote for Trump this go around. Cruz has been a big defender and supporter of the president for the last 4 years, and the stakes are way higher now than even in 2016. So now does that make sense? So now they're going to say, well, what about in 2018, the 2018 Senate race? Cruz only beat Beto by 3 points. 3 points, that's it. So my asterisk on that is that was the only statewide race. It was 2018, there was no presidential election, there was no governor's election. That was the only statewide election that was at play. And the media lifted Beto up like he was the second coming. And I think he way, way, way overperformed, and that was a fluke. I see Trump winning by 20 points in Texas. If Mitt won by 16, Trump's going to win by 20. Enthusiasm's through the roof for Trump, especially in places like Texas. What day is it today? Wednesday? So Sunday in San Diego, there was the Trump boat parade. So I got asked by a friend if I want to go to the boat parade. I was like, yeah, sure, bring the kid. I've never seen anything like it. That's the San Diego one. It's a view from one of the hotels on the bay. I don't know. There had to be like 1,000 boats there. It was just this huge flotilla. Like we started in one dock and we kind of went around the corner, around where the SEALs train, and like Navy SEALs, not like SeaWorld SEALs. And it was just like opened up. It was like Dunkirk or something over there. And no, I'm not exaggerating there was an average of 6 flags per boat. I mean, there's probably 6 on that boat right there, right? Some had like 2, but some had 20 Trump flags. And there were thousands of people along the shore of the entire bay. It was crazy. I've never seen anything like it. I'd argue there's more enthusiasm for Trump in San Diego, California, than there is for Biden in Texas. All right? So I think there's something to be said here nationwide. I think there's a lot of Republicans who in 2016 weren't sure about Trump, and understandably so, I get it. Glenn Beck was a good example of this, right? Obviously, he was hardcore on Cruz and spoke out very strongly against Trump. But now he's come out since the convention. He's like, oh, listen, on the issues, I was way off. And that's really, in the end, all that matters. You know, yesterday we talked a lot, and Bill O'Reilly did a great segment too on the Atlantic article and how just that whole hoax is just ridiculous. But even if it were true, I forget if we said this yesterday, even if it were true that Trump thinks all veterans are losers and idiots and whatever, suckers, if it were true, which it's not, but if it were, would you rather vote for the guy who secretly hates our veterans, but ends wars and doesn't start new ones? Or would you vote for the guy who said, like Biden, who says he loves our veterans, but voted for Iraq, and when he was vice president for 8 years, started new wars and oversaw endless ones? Who would you rather vote for? I think the thing that actually, in the end, proves one's respect for veterans more is not continuing and starting endless wars. And I share that as a point of the issues. When you focus on the issues, Trump wins. And in this case, Trump's the peace president too. I think it's like that with everything with Trump. So let me say it like this. See if you can follow me. I don't see any Republicans who voted for Trump in 2016 who won't vote for him today. Make sense? So they voted for him in 2016, but they're not going to vote for him. I mean, obviously, it's going to be someone, right? But you voted for Trump in 2016, but you're not going to vote for him today. You don't like him anymore. But I imagine plenty of people Republicans, who did not vote for him in 2016, who will vote for him today because he's proven himself worthy on the issues politically, judges, pro-life issues, Israel, et cetera. I think it's 10 to 1. All right, so for every one person who voted for Trump in 2016 and is like, oh, I don't like him anymore, he's too mean, or whatever. For every one of those, there's 10 people who in 2016 were like, I don't know, he may be like a New York City liberal in disguise, or I don't like his style, or I was a Rubio guy, or I was a Cruz guy, and I don't like, there's 10 who are like, oh, no, I'm all in for Trump now, especially with everything else that's changed culturally. Let me prove that here. So these are 2016 election results in states that had statewide elections in 2016, right? So let's do Florida first. Trump underperformed Rubio in Florida by 3.4 points. So what does that mean, underperformed? Rubio, in his Senate race in 2016, got 52% of the vote. Trump got 49% of the vote. So there's 3.4 points there that Republicans voted for Rubio over Trump. To me, that says there's room for growth. There's a lot of Republicans in Florida who did not vote for Trump but did vote for Rubio. And again, maybe they were bitter at Trump for the primary, whatever. But now, if you're going to vote for Rubio, you're going to vote for Trump too, right? So I see 3.4 points there of potential growth. In Ohio, it's even more. In Ohio, the Republican got, so Trump got 51% of the vote in Ohio. The Republican senator in Ohio got 58%. So it's 7 points right there that Trump could potentially grow. It's a lot of Republicans who did not vote for Trump in Ohio in 2016. Arizona, he underperformed by 3 points. Wisconsin underperformed by 3 points. Arizona by 5.6, Iowa by 6.9, Pennsylvania by 0.6, not very much, but I mean, that was a super close state. North Carolina by 1.3. So again, a lot of room for growth, I think, in these battleground states for Trump, and I wonder how much that's being considered in the polls and the predictions and all that stuff. I got to go here. I want to leave room for our next guest. I guess to wrap up this point on Texas specifically, not this election. Texas is not turning blue. I think Trump by 20. But long term, Texas is a big problem. because people from California are moving out of California and screwing up Texas just like they screwed up California. All right, people from California going to Texas, they're saying like, oh man, we don't need water storage here. We don't need nuclear power plants. Let's build more renewables. Police are overrated. Who needs jails? All the problems we have here in California, they're going to bring them to Texas too. That's the concern. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's change gears here. Let's take a deep breath and change gears to wrap up the show here. I love stories like this. You're not going to believe this. So 1939, there was a Jewish man in Europe. His name's Alfred Berger, and he wrote a letter to a stranger in America. And it said, "You're surely informed about the situation of all Jews in Central Europe. By pure chance, I got your address. My daughter and her husband will go to America. Help us to follow our children. It is our last and only hope." All right, so he wrote that in 1939. 60 years later, Ferris Cassell finds that letter in an attic and says, who are these people? What is going on? And Ferris Cassell is with us right now. The book is called The Unanswered Letter, One Holocaust Family's Desperate Plea for Help. Ms. Cassell, how are you?
Good morning, I'm okay.
Can you take us to that moment? Like paint that picture. Were you literally in an attic when you found this letter? Take us there.
No, it was not my attic, actually. My husband brought it home from his medical office. A patient had given him this letter. She had it in her family. It had been saved for 60, 70 years, over several generations, over a lot of moves. It had been sent to her family in August of 1939, just weeks before the Nazi Germany invaded Poland and World War II exploded across Europe. So when I read this letter and this desperate plea, standing in my kitchen, it was just, just an ordinary day. And all of a sudden, this letter from the brink of war and under Nazi occupation ends up in my hands. And it felt like I was holding a life in my hands at that moment. Questions just flew off the page.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what sparked your interest more than anything out of this letter?
Well, more than anything, it's hard to say, but one of the things that just made my blood run cold is my husband is Jewish, I'm not. But I understood that if we had lived in Vienna in those days, we too would have been running for our lives and desperately searching for someone to help us find a way out from under Nazi occupation and into safety and freedom. So I knew it could happen.
Yep.
I felt like it could happen to anyone.
Sure. What question, you said questions were racing through your head. What was one of the first questions that you actually went out to answer?
What I wanted to answer, I wanted to know, and I don't know that I've ever answered this yet, what would I have done if I'd received this letter in 1939? If I had lived in those times, what would I have done? In terms of the story, I wanted to know what the Americans had done. Had they answered this desperate letter? And I wanted to know if Alfred and Hedwig had managed to escape, and did they survive?
I don't want to give anything away, but let's just pick one of those. Did the Americans respond in any way to that letter?
So I interviewed the woman who had kept this letter for many, many years and saved it. and asked her that question. How had her family, those many years ago, how had they responded? And she was actually quite defensive at first. First, she said that they had written back, and then she admitted that she really didn't know, and she thought that no, they had not responded. But what they had done, this family, is they had saved this letter and saved it for decades and through several generations. Um, and that's sort of, to me, if you want to think of it in those terms, a redeeming act. They felt, the woman who saved it told me she felt it was a piece of history, and she thought it was important, and people should know what happened
Well,
back then.
thanks to you for putting it all together, though. It's amazing. You said the question you still haven't answered, and none of us could, is what we would do in that situation. We all like to think we'd step up and be the hero, whatever that looks like.
Yes.
But clearly, that's not always the case. What do we know how? What's his name? Edward Berger.
Alfred, yes.
Alfred. Do we know Alfred? Yeah, Alfred Berger. Do we know how Alfred Berger got this family's address? Because there was a stranger, right?
Yes, they were strangers. We don't absolutely know, but the Vienna post office kept phone books from major cities all over the world. And it would have been a simple thing for Alfred Berger to have used the phone books for a number of cities and looked up people with the same last name, hoping to find someone who either could have been distantly related or who at least was willing to sponsor them and become their sponsor to immigrate to America. And it looked better if someone appeared to be a relative. That gave you a leg on getting your visa, issued to immigrate.
Wow, wow, it's amazing.
And he
What
did send a number of letters. I found out, I discovered later in some archives, he had sent more than one letter.
I don't want to give away. I don't want to give it away anymore. Let's talk big picture. What lesson do you want someone to walk away from this book about anything? About the thing that I always go to is human nature. So what lessons on human nature are we supposed to? Does this story reveal?
I felt like the more I learned, the more I studied this, and the more I discovered. I had known nothing really essentially about the Holocaust except, what everybody knows, Anne Frank and magazine articles, a few things. But the more I learned about it, the more the Holocaust seemed to me a huge canvas of good and evil. And I learned that good and evil have many forms, and sometimes they're full of sound and fury, and you can see it clearly, and sometimes they happen in just ordinary, everyday acts. What I learned is that even ordinary people have a lot of power in this world, and we should recognize our capacity for doing good in this world and for helping people.
I like that term. It's a huge canvas of good and evil. What's the huge canvas? History or every moment, or what is that huge canvas?
The Holocaust happened, with German troops and lots of loud noise and written in history books. But the Holocaust happened across a large swath of the world, where Jews were rounded up and murdered. And everyday ordinary people saw this, and they saw what the Nazis were about, and ordinary people didn't do anything to help the Jews. Many people did who could. Many people risked their lives, but many people saw it and did nothing. And I think the lesson is that we're all in this world together. We're all ordinary people, but we all have a lot of power. to affect the course of large events.
That's a wonderful lesson. The book is The Unanswered Letter, One Holocaust Family's Desperate Plea for Help. And if you want to find out what happened, get the book, Ferris Cassell. Ms. Cassell, thank you for spending years, many years. Does it take a decade for you to write this?
It did. It did.
Yeah, you put a decade to put this together for us. Thank you for doing that. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Unanswered Letter, Ferris Cassell. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.